Hello and welcome to another day in paradise, and welcome to another edition of the Unapologetic Negropian. In today's video, 23 African men, 23 souls, 23 transitions happened only a few days ago in the small Spanish enclave in North Morocco. 23 young men who had dreams of living a better life in Europe. We as Pan-Africanists may smart at this idea, but there are a lot of continental Africans who have made this perilous journey only to put themselves in grave danger. Regardless, tens of thousands of Africans try to make their way overland, by sea, by air, up to the very north of the African continent for their chance to get over into Western Europe. This is exactly what happened with these men. Only a few days ago, 1,000, mainly young men of African descent, tried to make their way over the fence, the 8-foot fence that divides the small Spanish enclave of Melilla with the country that it sits upon, Morocco. They did everything in their power to scale the fence, and in the commotion, many people ended up transitioning. And let's just say that the Moroccan and Spanish governments did nothing to appease the situation. If anything, these are the people who are at fault, but they do have a main ringleader who is responsible for what happened to these 23 African young men. Was this avoidable? Why did it happen? Where did it happen? We're going to try and answer all these questions today. First, I'm going to ask you to please like, subscribe, share, click the bell notification, and please consider supporting the channel on our Patreon, link in the description. I'd also like to invite you to please follow the Oversight channel that is there to help you to invest on the African continent both safely and securely. Link also in the description. So, how did this happen? I think it's best for us to start, for context, with where this happened, because it's quite important. There are going to be people from all around the world who aren't going to understand the geographical nuances of Morocco and Spain. So, where do we start? We start hundreds of years ago in Spain. Spain was once ruled by the African Moors, okay? Half of it, let's say, was ruled by the African Moors. The other half was ruled by the Spanish, okay? The Spanish, over a couple of centuries, started to conquer and reclaim the land that was once ruled by the Moors. And eventually, they fought them off all the way back into Africa. In fact, they continued into Africa, and eventually Morocco became a part of Spain. So for a long time, Morocco was ruled by both a combination of Spain and France. Now, eventually, Spain had to give up its sovereignty of Morocco. And just like what happened with so many other African countries at that time, a lot of the colonial countries started to give back their colonialized territories back to the native people. But instead of fully pulling out of Morocco, Spain held on to two tiny pieces of very strategically placed land. And those are two tiny enclaves which survive today. The enclave of CUETA to the north, and a little further south, the enclave of Melilla. This is exactly where this incident happened. So what is Melilla? Melilla is a small town. If you take a look around it, it just looks like any old Andalusian Spanish city. Really, there is nothing to tell that you are actually on the African continent. It is tiny. There is only 87,000 people living there. So there is people living there. They are all Spanish. They're all European EU citizens. In fact, this part of CUETA is officially part of the European Union. So if you can get into CUETA, or if you can get into Melilla, then you can claim asylum with Spain. And this is exactly what many people have been trying to do. Many people have been trying to do everything in their power to get into Melilla. Some people have used tiny little craft boats. Sometimes they try to scale the fence. Sometimes they'll hide in delivery trucks to get into Melilla. It is very difficult to get there because in reality there isn't a proper border crossing between the two official countries of Morocco and Spain at this land border. It's just one big 8-foot fence which separates Africa with Europe officially. So this is why these African migrants were doing everything in their power to get into Melilla. They had to try to get into Melilla because it's the easiest way to get into the European Union and to claim asylum. So how did this happen? Once again, I have to explain to you the nuances of the political situation between Spain and Morocco. Spain used to rule over northern Morocco, but eventually they pulled out, leaving two little small parts of the country, tiny parts of the country, of Melilla and CUETA. Now Spain held on to these two little small enclaves, but the Moroccans have never been happy about the fact that they have kept a hold of these two pieces of land because they have quite strategic naval advantages in that region. There is a massive port in CUETA, and it really does help those people who are wanting to send goods back to Europe because they can clear them right there in Europe, but still whilst on the African continent. This is a massive strategic importance to Spain. So Spain isn't just going to give it up. Now, of course, Morocco is very unhappy with what happened. So 5 years ago, when the migrant crisis, so to speak, started to happen, and tens of thousands of African expats, economic expats who were looking for a better life, when they started flooding in to Europe, going up, driving the hard way overland up to North Africa, and started to use these illicit gangs who were trying to get people across the water into the mainland of Spain. When they were using these people, it of course hit the news, and many Africans transitioned, whether they be on a capsized boat or whether they were captured and forced into labor. The migrant crisis was massive. It was all over the news. We all heard about what was happening. The European Union had to do something. They had to make this stop. But it was difficult. How do you stop something that is protected by international law? It is completely legal to find asylum in another country if you fit the criteria, that is. But Europe, being the good people that they are, they wanted to make sure they stopped these gangs, they stopped these boats, these wretched craft from making their way over these really bad seas, the wretched seas between the Gibraltar Strait, the small channel of sea which divides the African continent with the European continent. So how do you get them to stop? Well, the European Union used the one thing that they had plenty of: money. So Europe started pouring money into these North African countries and essentially told them to do whatever they needed to do to stop these African economic migrants from making their way over the Mediterranean. What they did, the Europeans would turn a blind eye. But let's just say that the things that the Moroccan, the Libyan, the Tunisian governments were doing was, let's just say that they definitely took the gloves off. So all is well. No problem. Everything is going fine. And as you have realized, because it's not on the mainstream media anymore, the African migrants have stopped coming. Well, they are still coming, but they've come in much fewer numbers. And the reason they're coming in much fewer numbers is because many of them are avoiding North Africa altogether. Everybody is trying to either go in through Saudi Arabia and then up into Russia because it's safer, believe it or not. That part of North Africa, Northwest Africa, is not the best place for an African man to be, which is strange, right? I mean, we're talking about Africa, right? But the locals, as we already know, are not Africans, are they? Okay, so we're not going to go into that now, but they're not Africans. Human Rights Watch have been doing everything to keep an eye on what has been happening in North Africa. So why has this happened all of a sudden? Once again, we are going to have to go back in time. Like I stated earlier, France used to own half of Morocco, and the rest of Morocco was owned by Spain. Now, France controlled the lower half, the part that is now called Western Sahara. Now, this part is disputed territory. It is not a part of Morocco, although Morocco does claim it as being part of their land. But of course, those people who are native to that piece of land, to Western Sahara, have not just given up without a fight. There was one dissident, one man who is the leader of this group of people who were doing everything in their power to reclaim their land from the Moroccan government. And those people have been led by a dissident by the name of Brahim Ghali. Now, only a few months ago, Brahim Ghali got COVID, and so he needed help. But the Moroccan government see this man as a terrorist, so they didn't want to give him any help. But Spain gave him help. They gave him passage into Spain, and he went and sought medical advice in Spain. And of course, the Moroccans really did not like this. So what did the Moroccans do? The Moroccans did something unprecedented. They, who at that time were doing everything in their power to keep the Africans from going in to Melilla, started to ignore those Africans. They started letting them through. They started to allow the Spanish to take care of themselves. All of a sudden, the Moroccan government were doing nothing to stop these African migrants from getting in to the small Spanish enclave of Melilla. And this word spread, and everybody else was like, well, okay, we can get inside there because there is a bit of political fighting going on between Spain and Morocco. So many men, thousands of Africans started making their way towards Melilla. And this is where we are today. This is why this happened. So how do you get through an 8-foot fence? Well, what they started doing is 1,000 of these men rushed the entire fence. And when you have 1,000 men stampeding over one another, there was only going to be problems. In a contest of survival of the fittest, there was only going to be major problems, and a lot of people got hurt. The Spanish did everything in their power to fight them off. Some people made it through, got to the point where the European Union had to call the Moroccan government to ask them to assist the Spanish government in helping clear these men away from this fence. That is when all hell broke loose. The video circulating around social media, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to put it up here, but let's just say it's one of the worst videos that I've seen. There is about 50 African men. A lot of them are incapacitated. Some of them are just lying on the floor. And at the same time, the Moroccan policemen are walking around and they are treating them very badly. I'm trying to be very careful with my words, guys, but it is a horrible video to watch, to say the least. So 23 men have transitioned. 23 African men have transitioned, but this is the official number that is coming from the Moroccan government. The actual number is more like 37 young men. And this is the situation that is happening right now. And that is the reason this incident, I keep calling it an incident, but in reality, if the Moroccan police had just held their ground, this would have never have happened. They made it happen. The Moroccan government made this happen purposefully to show the European governments, the European Union, how much they are needed to stem the flow of African migrants into Europe. So why don't you know about it? Why is this only being put on social media? Why is it not being put on mainstream media? What is the problem? Especially here in Europe, you would have thought that 23 people transitioning, well, that would have made front page news. But of course, we're in Europe and these are Africans. So no, of course it didn't happen. There is one main reason why it was never going to be put on mainstream media. And that is because of the relationship between the European Union and the big media outlets. So the European Union have put a mandate to these huge media outlets and told them not to speak about this migrant crisis. And the media outlets have held true to this. So you won't see this on BBC News, you won't see this on ITV or CNN or CNBC or all the other ones. You're not going to see it on there. Okay, they are not going to put it there because this is a political nightmare for the European Union, because all the things that are happening to these Africans, all the videos that are coming out with this disgusting treatment by the Moroccan and Spanish governments, well, who do you think's paying for all that? Of course, the European Union are paying for it. even the northern countries, even the United Kingdom and Sweden and Germany, they're all collectively paying these North African countries to stem the flow of Africans reaching Europe. And this is the way they are doing it. They are making things so terrible for Africans that most Africans are choosing not to make the journey in the first place. And this is exactly what they are trying to do. And this is exactly why the European Union are paying the money. And this is exactly why the economic migrants have stopped coming. Because the things that are happening to those people in North Africa are so bad, I wouldn't be able to show it on YouTube because they would definitely close me down. Let's just say it reminds me of, pre-World War II, really bad stuff. The European Union do not want the general public to know that it's their tax dollars, their money, that is being spent on this type of cruelty that is happening in North Africa. So who is ultimately at fault for what is going on? Well, of course, the European Union, you could say that they are ultimately at fault because they paid for this to happen. Literally, it is their money. You could also say that the Spanish and Moroccan governments are also at fault. I mean, does Spain need to be in North Africa now? I mean, it's 2022. Come on, man. Probably not. But, Morocco still wants this piece of land. They could have settled this in a diplomatic manner, but they chose to use those African migrants as cannon fodder. I know that some of you Pan-Africanists will even point your finger at those Africans who are choosing to make this perilous journey. But if you do, then it's quite obvious that you have no understanding of what is happening in Africa and have no understanding of the lies that are being lived by the vast majority of West Africans. A lot of West Africans see a lot of black people in Europe and they're doing very well. They also see a lot of African Americans living the life that they would dream of living. Many of them, I say the majority of them. Of course, there is 5, 10, 15% of Africans, there is a growing middle class who are doing extremely well for themselves. And of course, these are the people that we see all the time being portrayed on social media. But we tend to forget about those people who are earning $200, $300 a month. Those people who do want to live a slightly better life. Those people who do want to go to a medical institution and become a doctor without having to pay for it, whilst living a better life themselves. So we know these people exist. And we need to make sure that we don't forget about them. We need to make sure that the 37 people who transitioned, those 37 Africans, are never forgotten.